Mr. Attorney General, thanks for the time.
Sure.
You're here to talk about Operation Legend. How many arrests have happened in Chicago as a result of Operation Legend, and would they have not happened without it?
That's right. They probably would not have happened without it. There have been several hundred state arrests and approximately 200 federal. The most important thing is how these cases are handled with the federal law enforcement system. We have stronger penalties, and we're also able to detain these people before trial when they pose a threat to the community, whereas the state law hasn't been providing that protection.
Meaning what? They can get out on bail and reoffend?
Yes, and that's one of the primary problems in Chicago and in Illinois right now, and in many states, in many cities around the country. We're returning to a revolving door where they will not hold even violent offenders, murderers, serious felons, people who have shot at other people. Are not being held, not being detained. And a lot of the crime, it's common to see multiple felonies, multiple gun violations on people who commit gun homicides.
Murder has been up in a lot of American cities this summer. Why do you think that is?
I think there could be a number of reasons for it. I think some of it was releasing a lot of violent offenders during the COVID period. And they didn't take into account how dangerous some of these people were. But I think also I am told, and I've visited a lot of cities, talked to a lot of chiefs, a lot of the criminals, the shooters, the gang members have become emboldened. And they don't think there are going to be any consequences for them carrying guns and engaging in this kind of activity. And the police in many cities, and perhaps a little here, initially pulled back somewhat during the defund the police and the demonization of police that occurred in the wake of the George Floyd killing.
Is there also what's sometimes called a Ferguson effect, where do you believe where police are reluctant to mix it up with people?
Yes, I think that's an element. That's what I meant by pull back a bit. It's the Ferguson effect. And I think that that's happened in many cities around the country.
Do you have any thoughts about why violence is up so much in Chicago?
Chicago has been more violent and has had a higher homicide rate than most of the country, for quite a while. But it really, as you know, was going out of control with, 60 people shot on one weekend and things like that. I don't have a, holistic theory as to why that is here. Gangs are the driving force of it.
I'm curious about your thoughts about the concern over police conduct, especially when we see shootings of what appear to be unarmed people. Do you think that there is something to be learned from this, that police can do their jobs differently to reduce these encounters?
No, I think the common denominator really is resistance to police. I'm not saying that if one resists police, then it's Katie bar the door and anything goes. But all of these episodes, or virtually every one of them, start with physical resistance to the police. And things get out of control. Also, the number of unarmed people shot is very small compared to all the encounters. I mean, we have, because of the number of guns in this country and the high crime rates in this country, we have, high volume of contact between police and violators. And yet, last year, there were 9 African Americans who were unarmed who were shot by white police officers. And I think there were a total of 40 or so, maybe, nationwide of people shot who were unarmed. But in that range, it's small. But even there, in many cases, those individuals were fighting with the police and attacking the police officer.
But would you favor what some police executives have talked about is more training for de-escalation, where it seems in the minds of many that if you don't obey a policeman's command, they just keep upping the force until you do. Is there some advantage to so-called de-escalation training, do you think?
I think police, by and large, do de-escalation from the very moment they encounter people. I know that it's become a buzzword, hey, we need to do more de-escalation, but that's what police do. They try to de-escalate. And it's basically, trying to give an opportunity to the person to comply and trying to get them to comply without using force. Police are not out there to necessarily start physical confrontation and get into fights with people. People have to remember something. The police officer doesn't have the luxury of walking away. He can't say, oh, you don't want to be arrested today? I'll see you some other time. When someone resists, they have to obtain compliance, and they usually try to do it verbally without physicality. But obviously, de-escalation has been, should remain part of the arsenal, so to speak, of the police in dealing with potential criminals or suspects. But there's a double standard going on. And this is what's happening. Normally, we would say, wait till all the facts are in before you judge somebody. But that's not happening for police officers. The prosecutors frequently don't put out all the facts in a shooting. And the media piles on right away with the most nefarious interpretation of events and usually picks up the chant of extremists who have an axe to grind against the police. So a police officer is personally demonized, and the episode is frequently mischaracterized from the beginning, and the truth never catches up with it. And that's the conundrum that we face in law enforcement. The prosecution holds back the information. Now, in the current environment, I think we should get out facts much more quickly to be fair to the police officers.
Though concededly, there are some obvious exceptions to that, to the police acting responsibly and the facts not getting out.
Well, are you saying that there are cases where the police use excessive force? Oh, of course there are. But far fewer than is being presented by the media generally and by the activists who have an axe to grind against the police.
Let's talk about this summer of violent protest, or what you've called rioting in cities. Are you seeing any pattern with the people that you've arrested, some 300 or so arrests under the federal system? Are you seeing any pattern of who these people are? Are they radical left? Are they radical right?
Well, there have been a lot more arrests by the state and local, and we review as best we can those situations, and we try to learn about those people as well. And I think, yes, there is definitely a pattern. The violence in most of the cities is precipitated by sort of hardened extremists who come equipped for battle. The various implements of their violence are conveniently orchestrated to arrive at the proper place at the proper time. And they are, by and large, extreme left-wing Marxist people who want to bring down and tear down the current system. There are also some, I would say, pure anarchists who don't necessarily want to build a Marxist system. It's not clear what they want to build, but they definitely want to tear down the system. That group is sometimes referred to as Boogaloo or similar types of groups. But they are fewer, from my knowledge, they are fewer than far between compared to the sort of Antifa-type groups that are involved. And I've talked to the chiefs in many of the cities that have had the worst rioting and obtained information from them about what they're seeing, and that's their assessment as well.
Why don't we see in the charging documents a reflection, though, of when people are in the radical left? I've heard you talk about Antifa, but when you look at the actual charging documents, you don't see that reflected. So how do we know that's the case?
Well, unlike international terrorism, where belonging to a group might be a problem or an element in an offense, or a RICO case where you establish that a particular group and engaging with them is a criminal offense. Espousing a particular ideology or belonging to a particular group is not necessarily a criminal offense. So when people are being arrested in the hurly-burly of a riot, it's because they threw a brick or they threw a Molotov cocktail. And it's not an element of the offense, and government doesn't need to prove or want to go about proving exactly what the person's affiliation is. But there's no question, Antifa is a movement, and it has a lot of different groups and splinters of groups. For example, out in the West Coast, you have the John Brown Gun Society, a reference to John Brown of pre-Civil War era. You have the Rose City group of Antifa. You have the Puget Sound group. They have websites. They're organized. And then you have little pop-up groups that are affiliated with them that sort of adopt a name for a particular event. But anyone who has spent a moment at these things and heard their chants and what they're calling for can see right away that they say they are revolutionaries, that this is a revolution.
Some of the charging documents, though, do refer to people that are, for example, the Boogaloo Boys. So we do see the radical right charges.
Well, Boogaloo is not radical right. And that's one of the misconceptions that's being, essentially perpetuated by the media. They are people who believe that the current system has to be torn down and completely replaced. People join it for different reasons. Some have different visions of what the future should look like, but they're all in agreement it should be torn down.
So they're leftist Boogaloo Boys?
They're anarchists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about another thing we're seeing this summer, though, which is armed vigilantes also showing up to the scenes of these protests? Does that bother you? I'm
very concerned about that because, one of the reasons we have a law enforcement system and why that's the obligation of government, that's part of the social contract, it's to prevent people from taking law into their own hands and preventing vigilantism. When government doesn't do the job, one of the consequences of that is that at the end of the day, there are people who will take the law into their own hands. And that's why it's not acceptable to me for the government to pull away and let these rioters run riot. They have to be stopped.
But you would discourage people from acting as vigilantes and taking up arms on their own?
Yeah, I think things should be left to the government, and the government should do its job.
One other question. You said in an interview last week that that Jacob Blake was holding a knife when he was shot in Kenosha. Is it clear that he was holding a knife, that he was armed at the time, and that the policeman saw it?
Well, this is one of those cases that I just referred to, where the state Attorney General prefers not to put out information about the case, and I think that can be unfair to the individual and sometimes to society as a whole. But at this point, I'm not going to say what the evidence is. I know what the evidence is, but I think this illustrates why people should hold their fire and learn all the facts before they crucify this particular police officer. For example, if he did hold a knife, and I've seen some news stories saying he was told to drop the knife, he had a knife, he did not drop it. He was close to the officer. Within 20 feet is considered a lethal threat, that he can get to the cop in 1.5 seconds. So when he refused to drop it and was proximate to the cop and had just fought over the taser, if he had a knife at that point, that would have been a justified shooting in general terms. Everything depends on all the facts.
Well, you seem to say that you think those accounts are accurate.
I didn't say that. I said, I've seen some accounts that say that. The other thing people don't seem to be...
Well, I guess I'm asking. I know you didn't say it, but are you saying that they're accurate?
No.
Okay.
I'm saying I'm not going to say what the facts are. I think people should wait to see what the facts are before they judge the episode. But people are also ignoring the fact that this was an individual who went and took the 3 children from this woman and put it in her car, actually, took the keys, and he was going to drive away with the 3 children. So what do the cops do? Suppose he was armed with a knife. Suppose he was getting into the car or could have gotten into the car with the 3 children. What are the police supposed to do? Wave goodbye as he drives off with 3 children and a knife? At least a knife. He may have had a gun in the car. The officer may have thought. The key point here is that we have to look at this thing from the standpoint of the officer at the time and what they perceived and what they knew. And there's too much generally speaking, not talking about this particular episode, there's too much Monday morning quarterbacking that is frequently based on ignorance of the facts and not understanding certain basic rules about police training. I hear a lot of people say, well, he could have shot him in the leg in some cases. Why did he have to? Because police are trained. Once the lethal force line is crossed, you shoot at the center of the body mass. That's it. That's the training. And most people don't have the ability and those kinds of circumstances to carefully aim at someone's kneecap or whatever. So I just think that we ask these individuals to go into very dangerous situations and to make these split-second decisions that determine whether they're going to go home to their family. They're human beings. They're very courageous people to take on this assignment, and they deserve more consideration than is being given them now by a segment of the American population.
But isn't it also understanding why there's so much concern over these things? Because people are getting killed.
Well, people are getting killed primarily by crime. Yes, there were 9 African American males who were unarmed that were shot by police last year. 9. In 6 of those cases, the individual was physically attacking the police officer. Okay, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of interactions around the country, there are 7,000 young African males who were killed every year by gunfire by other black males usually. It's the leading cause of death of black males under the age of 44. That's the death. That's the crime. That's what police are there to protect people against. Who's going to do it other than the police?
Moving on to some other areas. Can you explain why the Justice Department has decided to take over the defense in this libel case involving the president?
Yes, that's the so-called Westfall statute, which says that if someone is employee of the executive branch or the legislative, and they are sued for a state tort that occurred in the course of them working for the government, of their duties for the government, then they can have it certified to be moved to federal court, and the United States is then substituted as the party. This is done frequently. It's been done for presidents. It's been done for congressmen. The normal process was followed in this particular case you're talking about. And there's particular cases that are right on point. For example, the Barringer case involved a member of Congress who was asked about, in an interview while he was in his office, was asked about his separation from his wife, and he allegedly defamed someone in the course of that answer. And the court said, in a representative democracy, elected office holders who are asked questions by the press that have a bearing on their character and suitability for office and so forth, their answers to those questions, even if it relates to their personal lives, are in the course of their employment and can be covered by the Westfall Act. So this was perfectly legitimate under not only the statute but case law.
So for the benefit of our viewers who are not up on the Westfall Act, in plain language, what does the law say a federal official can do?
An elected official who is questioned by the press about his personal affairs and responds in a way that he's then sued for defamation is treated as that having occurred in the course of his employment, and that then becomes a suit not against the individual but against the United States that the United States will defend in federal court.
Now, you said this is a sort of a routine application of this law, but isn't this law usually asserted, this defense is asserted early on? Here comes this is coming quite late in the process, isn't it?
What difference exactly does that make?
Well, you said this is a routine matter. Routinely, isn't this defense asserted early on?
Well, I've said it's routine to the point where it's been delegated to a lawyer in the tort branch of the civil division. In other words, it's not particularly unusual for somebody who's sued on a tort to invoke the Westfall Act.
What did you have a role in agreeing to this?
I was told that a request had come over and that the civil division was going to approve it, that it was consistent with the law and the practice, and I thought it was fine.
Did you have to sign off on it?
No.
Was the president's action, though, within the course of his official conduct?
Under the terms of the Westfall Act, it was, yeah.
Because?
Well, as I said, in the Barringer case, the court said that an elected official in a representative democracy who's challenged with questions by the press about his personal affairs while he's physically within, his office, is making that statement, responding to the press, is part of the course of that official's employment.
Let's talk a little bit about election security. You've said before you have some concerns about mail-in ballots. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about one of the concerns you've expressed, and that's the possibility of counterfeiting. You'd have to, wouldn't you, to have a successful counterfeiting operation, choose a specific precinct, have the ballot exactly mirror that precinct's ballot on the same kind of paper, in an envelope, signed by a voter with the right signature. How realistic is that concern?
Well, first, I did add that as a concern. My primary concerns are other things, the usual ones of fraud and coercion. But I did point out, with all the hoopla about concern of foreign influence, that mail-in ballots do provide a vector for foreign influence. It might even be cheaper for the foreign government to counterfeit ballots in some critical districts than to engage in the other kinds of activities they have. And your question assumes that every state, has the same form of ballot with precinct by precinct, different ballot forms and different names on it and so forth. I don't know if that's the case. I don't think it is. I think, it depends on the state what the form looks like. But, what I'm saying is foreign intelligence services are very able. They can counterfeit currency, and they have a lot of capacity, and I don't think counterfeiting a state ballot is particularly challenging for them if they wanted to do it.
Would you say, though, this is a very realistic concern?
Countries do want to interfere in our elections. I think on the hierarchy of concerns, it's, in my mind, well below coercion and fraud.
Okay, and the fraud thing you've mentioned, the Carter-Baker Commission report that came out after the 2000 election. That came out in 2005. It's 15 years later, and we've had a lot of experience with mail-in ballots. Is it fair to say now the states have figured out how to do this?
No, because the mail-in ballots have predominantly been absentee ballots. And I've made clear, I don't have a problem when someone has a reason they can't appear in person of them requesting an absentee ballot, and then the ballot is supplied to them. That has been going on, and some states have that pretty well locked down. What we're talking about now is mass mailing to everyone on the voter list at a point where we know for certainty that many people on that list are not going to be at the addresses to which that ballot is sent. But I also feel people have to pause and think why we vote the way we do and why that has evolved over hundreds of years. People appear before in the right polling place where their name is on record. They identify themselves. They vote in secret. They are behind a curtain. No one is allowed to go with them while they vote. Why? That prevents people from selling their votes or being influenced as to how they vote or other kinds of fraud. And it also, by preserving the secrecy of the vote, is very critical to that. Because if the vote is secret, no one's going to be willing to, quote, buy it from you because they never know how you vote. We are losing all of those attributes. It's not secret. Your vote is not secret with a mail-in ballot. It has to be, tagged to your name. People can exercise undue influence. And there have been cases over the last 20 years of undue influence, people telling people in nursing homes how to vote and things like that. And, the other thing is fraud, collecting ballots and then submitting them, finding ballots, paying people to give you ballots and so forth.
What is the basis, though? I mean, what do you hope happens? It seems pretty clear that a vast number of Americans are going to cast their ballots in this election by mail. Basically, what is Bill Barr's position about that? Don't do it, or states need to be more careful?
I think it should be treated as absentee ballots, and some states permit, would permit people who have a medical reason not to do it, such as, vulnerability to COVID. Perhaps they could handle it as an absentee ballot. That's the way I think it should have been done.
But we're way beyond that now, aren't we?
Well, yeah, we are. And I don't think that's good. And that's what I'm saying. I'm thinking people have to pause and think. And this is what's being given short shrift, okay? When someone commits fraud and we play loosey-goosey with voting, that deprives Americans of their fundamental right to vote and to have their vote properly counted. It steals people's votes. That's bad. That's why fraud is not just sort of, oh, well, it's just going to happen on the fringe. We can sort of ignore it and take these risky measures. It's a bad thing to expose people to that kind of risk of losing their vote. But the second thing is that we are in a very contentious period in our history where things are very close. And every vote counts in these elections. And people have to have confidence in the integrity of the outcome of an election. If they don't, then there's problems of legitimacy arise in people's minds. And as I've said, we're playing with fire. The idea that has now been current only since Trump went into office, because if you go back and look at all the media stories on TV, on newspapers, academic studies, they would say that voting raises problems of fraud and coercion.
Mail voting, you mean?
Yes. And that narrative, as they say nowadays, all of a sudden stopped when Donald Trump got into office. And now people are just willing to brush all of those concerns aside. Oh, yes, just send out the vote. Every vote, just send out the ballots without, dealing with the obvious hazard that's involved in that.
Let me ask you finally about the Durham report. Is John Durham nearing the end of his investigation?
Yeah, I'm not going to characterize exactly where he is. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Would you say it's unlikely that there'll be further criminal charges?
No, I wouldn't say that at all, no.
So there could be?
Yeah, there could be.
Will we hear anything about the Durham report before the election?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that either.
Well, could there, for example, be an interim report?
I'm not going to get into what there might be.
Well, how about the question this way? If there is an interim report before the election, won't some people think that that's an attempt to influence the election? Or would that be a fair accusation if there were an interim report?
Well, this is sort of hypo on a hypo.
Why not?
Okay, but I'll just say, nowadays there are people who will say anything, and you can almost bank on the fact as to what they're going to say, and I don't let that bother me. I'm going to do what I think is right and in the public interest.
You wouldn't be concerned if there were an interim report?
It depends on what the report said, and as I've already said, I'm conscious of the election, and I don't think any of the things that are being worked on are going to have an adverse effect on that. And I also think there's, strong public interest involved as well.
What would be the utility, though, in an interim report? Why not wait till it's done?
Well, I haven't said there is going to be one, and that's a hard question to answer in the abstract.
Mr. Attorney General, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.